Well, friends, good evening, everyone, and welcome once more to our fireside. Some of you are repeat participants, and some of you are here for the first time, but welcome to everyone, and thank you for spending part of your time with us on this Sunday evening. The theme for this evening's fireside is Growing Up Global. This is particularly significant because the world we live in today obviously is very different from the world of 50 years ago, from the world of 20 years ago, and even dramatically different from the world we knew 5 years ago. It almost seems that the changes that are taking shape are gaining speed exponentially and changing scope exponentially. The discourse around what we're dealing with and how to advance as a society is seemingly, it's increasingly focused on rethinking our issues and the solutions for those issues. So we thought in this session we can explore how to create coherence between what's deeply personal and very much local with what is impact making and global. Very few people have been working specifically in this space. One of them is our very special presenter this evening, Homa Tabangar. Homa is based in the Philadelphia area. She's spent 20 years working in global competitiveness, organization, business, and international economic development. She's working in the for-profit space, nonprofit, government agencies. She turned to global education as her current focus. She's written multiple books, including Growing Up Global and Mastering Global Literacy. She's the co-founder of the Big Question Institute, and you can imagine what that means, and the Oneness Lab. She's a media contributor to such outlets as ABC, NBC, BBC, the Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune. She's a graduate of UCLA and Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. I could go on, but I think we'd all much rather hear from Homa. So thank you, Homa, for taking the time and sharing your experience and insights with us.
Thank you so much, Vafa and Gisujun. It's really wonderful to join you. I think most people on this call are from Canada, but maybe not all. So it's wonderful to see lots of faces popping up. I only know a few of you here, so thank you for having me. And just as a sign of how quickly our world is changing, since you got my bio, the name of my graduate school has changed. So the Princeton Woodrow Wilson School changed its name about 3 weeks ago, I think, because of the recognition after years of protests by students, but only in the recent years, that Woodrow Wilson was an avowed racist, even though he won a Nobel Peace Prize, even though Baha'is will know that Abdu'l-Baha praised him, but he was a very, very problematic figure. So it's interesting that my bio, one version of it says I went to the Woodrow Wilson School. That name no longer exists, and I'm very happy for that change. And it's a very interesting example of how our world is changing and really going through a simultaneous process of what Baha'is think of as integration and disintegration. So integration would be getting rid of this name of a racist president, as well as it's both integration and disintegration. So it's kind of an interesting detail from my bio. I'm going to share some slides, And what we will, uh, what I will be talking about sort of centers around the ways that we talk to our kids. And a lot of work that I've been doing, as Vafa mentioned, over the past decade or so around what it means to raise children to thrive, this idea of growing up global. This is the book, Growing Up Global. Thrive really as global citizens in this world that is changing so rapidly. And I really came to this as a mother, being concerned about how my own children would be raised, and also as a Baha'i. And I have the privilege of talking about this theme and writing about it mostly to kind of public audiences. And so getting to focus on a sort of Baha'i angle and how the Baha'i teachings influence my work is really a privilege. So I will share, these are some ideas that educators around the world are really worried about. This idea that we are preparing our children for jobs that do not yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented to solve problems we've never heard of. And as these pictures on the slide show, it is a time of great turmoil and uncertainty. And so everything we're doing with our children, with our schools, with community building is sort of framed in this challenge of incredible complexity and uncertainty. And so the pushback, the way that my work is oriented is that in spite of all these unknowns, a lot of research into how we learn, into how our brains function, into what organizations need shows that the answer lies not so much in, it doesn't lie in what you memorize, it doesn't lie in a sort of what our grades show, but it's more about gaining an ability to do agile thinking, to be curious, creative, and what in education circles they call developing a global mindset. And so there's this pushback that we shouldn't really think of those as soft skills. They're often called soft skills, whereas like math, science, getting good grades, those are hard skills. But think of these really as the way that we look at these topics. And so I have this privilege of working on some really fun projects that are really oriented towards celebrating and exploring this world that we might build. And so the approach that I take, global insecurity and division, I mean, we are certainly living it. That's how we are all on a Zoom call right now. Our children have an opportunity at the same time. And the opportunity is to learn about the world friendship. And that in itself is very hopeful. And so we are living in this simultaneous time of so much of the teaching and the conversation is really around fear. And in the Baha'i writings, we have this beautiful idea of the power of joy. And so this quote, joy gives us wings. And think about it, education in the context of unlocking potential. So think about, as I read this quote in that context, joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our intellect keener, and our understanding less clouded. We seem better able to cope with the world and to find our... I actually have done a whole week of a class at Greenacre Baha'i School just on this quote, because in many ways it really embodies the idea of the to thrive. And if anyone has heard of the theory of flow, about getting in your flow, you know that what happens is it is as if we have wings. when we are doing something we love so much, or limitations, and it really is a way of nurturing genius. And so this idea of joy, in spite of incredible anxiety around us, can really be a way of sort of finding our flow of understanding and being able to cope with the world. So I want to share as sort of like a little case study. This is my latest project. This, what you see on the screen, and I don't know if you can see me because I really can't see you right now, is this, and I'm going to open the box, and coming out of the box are 50 cards that highlight different activities from cultures around the world. And part of Global Kids is this booklet. And so what you see on your on the slideshow is what the booklet looks like when it's opened up. So this is the booklet of Global Kids, and I'm sharing it because there are some ideas in here that are Baha'i faith. And I happened to actually learn on Instagram over the last few weeks that I think every toy store in Canada, if they carry toys, they carry Global Kids. So it would be pretty easy to find. So one of the ideas is on this side of the card, called Thinking Globally Every Day. And so what we're teaching kids, and this is a publisher called Barefoot Books, if you can see it. It is not a Baha'i publisher, but it's committed to telling stories of kids from all over the world, and really teaching wonderful values like mindfulness, like global citizenship. So in what we're teaching, and this is like teaching kindergartners, but hopefully it's useful for any age, in this idea of thinking globally every day, as you can see in the green square with the two children, that our world is like a garden. It's beautiful and interesting because of all the variety we can discover. Thinking globally means appreciating what is similar and different in our world's garden of people, places, and traditions. And that you don't have to travel the world to think globally. You need an open heart and an open mind. And in fact, there's a television show through NBC Universal, which I'll maybe tell a little bit more about, which has all of these same themes, called Nina's World, which is also based on Growing Up Global, that takes these ideas, which really are, I think, the ideas of our time. They're the ideas that allow us to cope with the world, to find our sphere of usefulness. And so from the Baha'i writings, we read that the world of humanity is like unto a rose garden, and the various races, tongues, and people are like unto contrasting flowers. The diversity of colors in a rose garden adds to the charm and beauty of the scene, as variety enhances unity. And so if you are a Baha'i on this call, this idea of the fact that we are like the flowers of a garden is a very common idea. It's a very popular, well-known idea in the Baha'i writings. And what has been really fun to discover is that sharing this idea has really been helpful to educators, to media that is creating media for children. And this is an idea that a young child can embrace, because a young child can imagine what it's like to be a flower in a rose garden, and that adults who did not grow up learning about cooperation and diversity and the beauty of diversity can also gain from these ideas. So in a lot of ways, the work that I'm doing, like with Growing Up Global and Global Kids, is almost subversive in terms of it's really teaching parents how to have these conversations of unity and diversity, even as it is teaching their children. And then also in the booklet for Global Kids, we have this idea here at the top: what is a global kid? And so what we teach is that being a global kid is like being a friend to the whole human race. When we explore the beauty, fun, and wonder that our wide world has to offer, it makes us feel happy, connected, and curious more, just like a good friendship does. And so that is an idea that I have actually stolen very widely and used in all my work. Being a friend to the whole human race is a portion of one sentence from the teachings of Abdul Baha, from the Baha'i teachings. And so it's been a very interesting experience because I have sort of modeled this whole last decade plus of my career on half of a sentence from the Baha'i writings, being a friend to the whole human race. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. So a few other quotes or teachings of these come from the writings of Baha'u'llah that guide this work include the idea that the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. And I think particularly right now, as we are isolated from each other because of the coronavirus pandemic, we realize how the well-being, our literal well-being, is unattainable unless we can unite. And actually, one quote I do not have here, but I think is as vital as this one, is the idea that the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. And so Baha'u'llah, this is a quote from Baha'u'llah, is teaching that in order to have unity, we must have justice. And so I think we're seeing this over and over with the discrepancies, with the inequality, the inequity in particularly in the United States and in countries like Brazil, where inequalities are being even more highlighted in the midst of this pandemic. And so we certainly don't have unity, and it's going to be really hard to attain unity unless we can attain justice. So these are just a few kind of interesting ideas that reinforce the ideas that the earth is one country and mankind its citizen, that we live in this era of unity. When a Saudi astronaut on the International Space Mission went out into space, he pointed out that the first day or two, we all pointed to our countries. The third or fourth day, we were pointing to our continents. By the fifth day, we were aware only of the earth. And I think this shows the capacity of our time, that we have, within such a short period of time, we can see the whole world, even if our orientation is for our country, and that we all have this capacity to really widen the scope of our vision. Baha'u'llah says, let your vision be world embracing. And at the same time, that this idea is for the whole wide world, it's also supremely intimate. And so back when Carl Sagan came up with the program Cosmos, he shared that there are as many atoms in each molecule of your DNA as there are stars in the typical galaxy. And I think that is, there are other quotes from the Baha'i writings of this wondrous composition of a human being, and that within each atom there is a universe. And that I think it also teaches that this ability to be connected to the whole wide world is sort of intimately intertwined with our very DNA, with our very essence. And there's a lot of data, I'm not going to go into this, but that when people, we are, as much as we think we're so divided, it really doesn't take a lot for us to change our perspective about others. So when we become acquainted or become a neighbor and get to know our neighbor. Just one person getting to know one Muslim or one Black person or one Jewish person or one immigrant or one Christian person can change our perspective about the entire population, that we have that capacity. We are wired to be united. The New York Times did a study a couple of years ago when there was discussion about in the United States of bombing North Korea. And they found that if an American can find North Korea on a map, we don't want to bomb it. We prefer diplomacy. It takes that one data point to transform the way we think about another country. Do we want to go to war? Do we want to bomb them or not? It doesn't take a lot to change our minds. And so I think that's one power of friendship and getting to know people and building community, and of course, a little bit of education. So when I talk to parents, I try to break down the steps of going from having sort of a more narrow view or to become and raise a global citizen and see yourself as a global citizen and pass those values on. I try to break down sort of thousands of quotes and studies and apps and books and articles and resources into 3 simple steps. And they are to first, you need to take a stand. You need to know what you stand for and how you demonstrate that. And this applies, I have spoken to just every imaginable perspective really on the planet. I've had the honor of traveling around the world and being invited by many different schools and communities and congregations. And these steps apply whatever you believe. So the idea that you stand up for something. The next idea is to pay attention to what is happening around you, who is in your community, what are the assumptions that you make, become a better listener. I'll talk about each of these. And then finally, to do something. And I'll show you a little bit of what that is. So the first step is to take a stand. And when we talk about what do you stand for, one example that I share is that I stand for global citizenship. And that's where I share this idea of being a friend to the whole human race. And this aha moment happened for me when during a short period of time, my family and I had the opportunity of spending just one term of school in the Gambia, where my brother-in-law and sister-in-law were living at the time. They lived there for 30 years. And the girl who is the second one on the right is our oldest daughter. And we have 3 daughters. And when I watched my own children interacting with their new classmates, and this is Layla after just like maybe a week or 2 at the most of being at her new school. And I was so touched by the experience of my children with these new classmates who on the surface had little to nothing in common with them, but they really became such close friends. And so the idea of being a friend to the whole human race was the aha moment for me as the definition of what it means to be a citizen of the world. So especially in the United States and increasingly in other countries, people have a problem with global citizenship. They say, this rise in nationalism. They say, I'm not a global citizen, I'm an American citizen, or I'm a Russian citizen, or a whatever citizen. And I push back on that because really, if you think about what it means to be a global citizen, if you think it means to be a friend to the whole human race, everybody wants to be a friend. Everybody wants to have a friend. And when there's more time, I'm able to have a conversation with the audience of what do you think of when you think of a good friend? And everywhere I go, the answers are exactly the same. They come in the same order even, where people say a good friend is loyal, kind, good listener, caring, they're helpful, they're non-judgmental, they've got your back, we have fun together. And that is such a universal idea that if we take this fragment of a sentence, we can really teach about what it means to be connected to the world as a citizen of the world who cares about our friend, who cares about the well-being of our friend, who would not turn our back on the suffering of our friend, but also finds joy as friends do. Friends have so much fun and laugh together, finds joy in this full universal idea of friendship. And so I find that's a way to help fill in the gap, because there has been such a gap between us and them. So it's something I stand for. Another idea, I think, as a embodiment of the oneness of humanity, which is another core principle of the Baha'i faith, is around empathy. And I've written a fair amount about the topic of empathy, but I'll just show you a few pictures. There are, I think it's sort of the one of the most important skills and foundations for learning, for building psychological safety, which allows for genius and innovation to really be unleashed. So these are some examples of the Global Kids cards, where we're actually teaching empathy as we teach about different cultures. So here we're teaching about Japan, but what we're really doing is teaching a deeper lesson. Same with this card about South Africa. We're teaching this word of Ubuntu, which is sort of like the ultimate idea of oneness and interdependence. Writing a letter to somebody shows empathy. Thinking about others in making a Guatemalan worry doll, or celebrating women as they do in Mexico during Mother's Day and International Women's Day. These are all ways to sort of break down learning about a culture for very young children. So a 5-year-old understands this, and at the same time, it is teaching something much deeper. Another important lesson, you might be familiar with the TED Talk of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, to go beyond a single story. And so that's a priority in teaching children about the world. So I know there's some Iranians on this Zoom, so we have a card that is teaching about Nowruz, and there's a half scene, and the activity on the back of the card, which isn't shown here, teaches about making sprouts, sabzeh. We want to break down the stereotype, for example, about Iraq or Arab-speaking countries. And what we teach in this case is that Iraq is the birthplace of algebra. And so there's innovation and learning how to count in Arabic, and we're making the Arabic numerals with Play-Doh, and that's the activity on the back. Or Rwanda. Many people think of Rwanda as the place where genocide took place. And that's, for many people that I have talked to in North America in particular, that's the only thing they really know about Rwanda. But Rwanda is actually the first country in the world to ban single-use plastic bags, or single-use plastics at all. And so what we want is for children to have their entree to a new culture to be learning the joy, learning some of the wonder, becoming a friend to the whole human race. And so I don't know that this perspective would have been as easy for me to embrace if it weren't for the guidance from the Baha'i faith. And so that's been a really important teaching for me. So this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek um, idea of how to raise racist kids. And I probably should have had a slide in between because this is a bit of an abrupt break. But the idea in Global Kids, the idea in Growing Up Global, in global citizenship, always includes anti-racism. And that is not usually the case in a lot of global education. Global education is often thought of as an exclusive domain of the elite. And so in all my work, I try to integrate the idea of, for example, we're not colorblind, we see color. And so this research shows that if, as a parent, you don't talk about race, you don't point out skin color, and you try to imagine or kid or tell yourself the story that you're colorblind, that is actually the way to advance racism. And your children will think that they are better than everyone else because what's happening is that by avoiding the conversation about race, you are making the topic unspeakable. And avoiding the conversation gives race a negative connotation. But if you remember the first quote I shared about us being humanity like the flowers of a garden, I don't avoid the beauty of a red rose. I don't avoid the beauty of a yellow daffodil. I celebrate that beauty. And so this is probably one of the simplest, most profound lessons that I have learned, that we can begin to, all of us, whatever race, whatever culture, whatever nationality, whatever language, wherever you grew up, to point out the beauty of humanity with your children at a young age, exposing them to different books from different perspectives, to different toys, dolls, whatever, and of course, friendships. And so when we really rejoice in our diversity, our children start to sort of build that muscle of having conversations about race and eventually about racism at a younger age. And so they can become part of the solution. You are showing them this is not a taboo topic. And here are a few of the ideas that, we all have bias. And so even myself, I grew up with Baha'i parents, and I grew up in the Baha'i community, but I really have, I feel like every day I'm discovering my own biases. And I think that's just part of living in 2020 and growing up in a nation where racism is the system. And, one thing that's also very interesting is that it is not just the United States. And so particularly anti-Black racism. Wherever you live, if you live in the Middle East, if you live in Canada, if you live in China, this is a vital, and in the Baha'i writings, we hear about how this is the most vital and challenging issue, particularly in North America, but all over the world. And so there are small steps that everyone can take to start having these really challenging conversations. In this equation, and I'm gonna stop the share shortly, in the equation of taking a stand, paying attention, and do something, this idea of taking a stand and paying attention to what different faiths teach, what different cultures celebrate, is one great way to build bridges is, and building our global citizenship, is this understanding that we all share ideas at the, and this is certainly a core teaching of the Baha'i faith, that there is one God and that all the religions share a common spiritual foundation and common threads, common themes. And starting with the golden rule, which might be the simplest of them all, but maybe one of the most profound, is a really great way to start practicing how you can be a friend to the whole human race. I am gonna move a little faster. So one of the important things, so I notice we might have some parents on the line as well as grandparents, or maybe aunts and uncles. And I think a very common question that we always ask our kids is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I want to challenge that question, because this is something, when I work with schools, we are trying to help them change some of the default approaches to learning, default approaches to a relationship with the world. And this is one of the first challenges that we give them, is don't talk about what do you want to be when you grow up. Instead, ask your kids, even from a young age, what problem do you want to solve? And so when we raise our children to be problem solvers, it has the potential to completely change the orientation. So what ends up happening, even from a young age, it is not as high stakes, like every step I take has to be perfect, or else how am I going to go to medical school? Instead, it helps our children to think about what they care about, what their passion is, what they're curious about. And this is actually very much in line with the Baha'i teachings, and I'll show you that in a second. So one way that I'm working with schools around the world is by getting involved in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a fantastic framework for young people and corporations to think about what problem they want to solve, because the problems of the world have such an urgency. And Baha'u'llah taught us to be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. And so this idea to pass along to our kids and our workplaces, to consider in our own lives, of what are the needs of the world? What problem? This, to me, this quote is basically saying, take a stand, pay attention, and do something. What problem do you want to solve? And to be sort of constantly asking yourself that, so that what you do matters. And there's a lot of research that shows for our children that when our schools are helping our kids do work that matters, the quality of their learning goes way up. The motivation to do the homework because it matters, because it's relevant, it completely changes the equation of what school is. So I think I'm going to end with this idea, because it helps us. There's a lot you can see. Actually, I'll share this one. I love this quote from Ziauddin Yousafzai, who is Malala's father. And he said that people ask me what is special about my mentorship that made Malala so bold and courageous, vocal and poised. I tell them, don't ask me what I did, ask me what I did not do. I did not clip her wings, and that is all. So I think, again, in Malala's case, what problem did she want to solve? from a very young age, she was anxiously concerned around the needs of the age and the age in which she lived. So I will just end there, and hopefully if there are any questions, but this idea of there are a lot of ideas sort of folded in here, but just thinking about taking a stand, paying attention, do something as a way of being a better global citizen, an anti-racist global citizen. So I will stop the share and open the floor. I guess I'll let Vafa
Thank you.
moderate this part. If there are
Thanks
any
very much,
questions,
Yeah,
or
no, I really
people can also
appreciate
put
it.
in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I mean, it's actually, it's a great, the note that you ended on is very consistent with what we try to promote in these firesides, is that at the end, it's all about engaging in the process of transformation, and not to think that, I as an individual have no role, that I do have a role, that I can have an impact, that every individual can take a stand, every individual can pay attention, and every individual can do something. And those are very poignant, and particularly when it comes to the cause of bringing up children. I mean, the argument is, you can educate these young buds if you want to become global, to be global, to be educated to be global. But that's not saying do not celebrate your national identity or your ethnic identity, because in fact it's a very important part of thinking global, that we're recognizing the beauty of that red rose that you talked about, or the yellow daffodil that you talked about. So great points. Friends, as you know, we have our normal process of putting either the questions that you have in the chat box that's available, or if you can raise your hand, digital hand, which should be, but it's different on different machines and on different platforms. So somewhere there's a digital hand that you can raise, and we can see it, and then we're happy to call on you, or read the question that you have. One of the things I did want to perhaps start the question while people are thinking about what they want to ask is, how do you get children to grow up globally, but at the same time celebrate their sense of identity, national identity, ethnic identity, and see the relationship between the two, as opposed to a potential contradiction or tension between the two, which is very often how things work out. How do you propose that parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents can work with the kids, even in the education system, for us to find that harmony between my self-identity as in a national context or an ethnic context, and my identity as a human being in a global context?
Yeah. So, a really important foundation of all of this is, and this also comes out of my understanding of the Baha'i faith. It's very informed by Baha'i teachings. The idea that removing false dichotomies. And so one false dichotomy is local versus global. So people get really hung up on the idea that if you're looking globally and you care about the world, you don't care about your community. And that is a false dichotomy. And the thing is, if you allow children to maybe sometimes lead you, you will see they have no problem. Both, and this is where the metaphor of being a friend to the whole human race is helpful, because I can be a friend to one person and another person. It doesn't take away from that idea. So being local and global is important. And then the whole thing of like, often, especially in adolescence, as we start to embark on a search of who am I and why am I here? What is my purpose? You know, all these big existential questions. Often the best answer comes from understanding who are they and why are they here. If I can understand, you know, like I have read stories from many different cultures about other young people, about their coming of age ceremony, maybe, or about their whatever traditions or their literature. That never takes away from who I am. If anything, it enriches a sense of self. And so we are living in this time of deep loneliness among young people who have everything, of great search. And I think some of it has to do with being cut off from sort of our destiny of being global citizens. We are cut off from the goodness and this richness of the world, partly because people around these young people have been very busy planting seeds of division, prejudice, nationalism. And so you find this dislocation, this emotional, psychological dislocation in young people who have every material benefit, but they are so sad. There are other reasons also. I don't want to say it's only because of that, but there is certainly a deep loneliness. And often there's a whole practice of culturally responsive teaching. And culturally responsive teaching centers the identity of each student and celebrates who they are as a means of excavating their ability to connect to other people. So it's a really interesting cycle that all the research is pointing out.
Great, thank you. Let me just scan to see if there are any hands up. Any friends have any questions? Hang on one second, let me read this. A private one just came in, a private message to me, that is, hang on. So if I understand it correctly, and the person who wrote it can correct me, one of the issues with kind of focusing on children versus, you know, the larger population is for children to think, as children are thinking, are growing up to be global and think differently, think about the problems they're going to solve. We have the reality of the world that we're living in. And a lot of the conversations that seem to be taking place, at least on the surface, seem to be what this person calls somewhat superficial, meaning we're dealing with the issues on the surface. We're not really trying to understand the root cause. And so how do we engage with our children or grandchildren in one context or within one framework, and then, you know, go to work or from home doing our work, and we're engaging in a different framework? How can we, is there a way for us to find greater balance or consistency between those two? That, you know, if I'm going to take a stand and pay attention and do something, it's consistent between how I'm helping the children become global and consistent with how I'm behaving and acting as a grown-up in my world. Because the demands are very different.
Yeah. You know, I think, I don't know if this directly answers the question, but I always think that world peace starts at the dinner table. And so that means you know, invite, these days we can't do it as much. Maybe you can sit outside socially distanced, but, you know, it's who your friends are that come to the table. But very importantly, the conversations that we have at home with our kids. And I think often this is such a hard time to be a parent right now. I have a circle of mothers of really young children that we have a Baha'i children's class in our public library in our local community that we call Little Global Citizens is the class. And I really feel for these parents of young children, because right now they are trying to keep their jobs, work from home, homeschool their kids, babysit their kids, be everything at all times. And it's extremely stressful. It's extremely hard. So this is a particularly hard time. And the irony is that the fact that the whole world is experiencing this at the same time. And so I think in some ways we've never been more united. And at the same time, it's never been as stressful and as demonstrably unequal. So, you know, I just think for parents, I don't know if this answers the question, but just try to be more mindful and more conscious. I feel like when especially my two older daughters were little, I was really stressed out. And I wish that I had more presence of mind to not worry about so many things going on. So I think schools are often not the place to be having these conversations unless teachers are going through very specific training. Like that's some of the work that I do, is to try to give them some of the training. Many of the teachers do not feel equipped at all, and they had no training, no preparation for this sort of global vision, globally competent learning in their schools. That's something that parents can sort of ask of their school districts and demand. But it's the job of parents these days.
Right, thank you. I'm going to ask Paul. Paul has his hand up. Paul, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question and then go back on mute. Thank you.
Paul, you remuted yourself. You unmuted and then you remuted.
Try again, Paul.
I'm trying. Yes, there we go.
There you go. Perfect. Okay,
right.
Go ahead.
It's not so much a question as a statement. I grew up in an area where, say, there's like about 20 black about 200 black families in my immediate environment. There's also only about 2 or 3 native families, about 4 or 5 East Indian families in Guyana. So I grew up with a Black consciousness. The thing is, I also practice my catechism from the Catholic Church, which teaches you the virtues of, which is basically the catechism is basis is Stoicism. So on top of that, I'm a huge reader. So I'm growing up in my world where the world considered me to be hostile. I'm growing up with these practices that says be virtuous, and I'm practicing them. I'm practicing all the things that I now understand in one statement. The universe has left us with a possibility that every single occasion should be balanced. A plus B equals 0. A minus B equals 0. A divided by um, B equals 0 and A multiplied by B is equal to 0. So it left us with that possibility. My degree is in philosophy, that's why I could come from it in that angle. So with leaving us in that possibility, I find that when I practiced my catechism, it was the same thing that we needed today, to slow down and to understand to ourselves, when you're in a situation with a person, do you want a clear and true value of the situation, or do you want to express your emotional part of it, whether it's resentment, anger, love, whatever? And I think we've practiced that for so long and we can't even see it in ourselves. I also ran a television station, and so I know the impact of television on the mind and what is done for us over the 100 years or so. It's basically lower our eloquence. It's lower our use of words, and it's also raise our hyperbolic use of words. So we become more emotional, and um, and we don't have the variety of words that we should have reached by now as a human race to express ourselves eloquently. So for me, as nature changes and consciousness move forward, we have new challenges, but basically they're old challenges presented in new ways, and we're using the old traits to think. So what we have is more complicated issues, just from the idea of how do we introduce our children to um, uh, thinking more equitably? How do we introduce our children to seeing the other as a complete individual, um, just like self, but the ideas, the way they express themselves might be different. And I think we don't have to go to other places. We just have to practice a couple of the values. My whole family was in practice. We're a family of 10, so we all practicing different things. For me, I just found, um, especially because the school I went to, and which was different, my high school, which was different to my friends, and I went to school where at 11 years old, we were expected to be young gentlemen, to be thoughtful, to be calm, to be thinking about the situation. We didn't all meet, we still little boys, but we were expected, and we practiced those values, not all the time, but as we got older and older, we we um it's become a part of our nature. So me is, yes, uh as a disability advocate, you see I'm in a wheelchair. um what I see is our intertwining among ourselves without realizing that we're doing this. But with a couple of words, we could change a hostile situation into a situation where the person listens. And in our fears, we had 5/8 of human history and war. Fear is right there next to us, and we tend to, because of the hyperbolic language that we use every day, tend to react to that more than anything else. But in our fears, um, we are close enough, an incredible amount of richness from every single individual that you meet. It doesn't matter who. You could stay with that person for 3, 4, 5, 6 years and never get the full depth of their personality and their experience. It really is an incredible thing that we are. And for me, I always found that was my most forceful motivation, to get to know that person and to avoid the traps of racism that we have. We live in. I moved out from my neighborhood basically to go to high school, um, where I discovered, well, I only learned the word state later on in life, that I was suffering from major borderline personality disorder. I'm really, really defensive of what I consider to be my own, and really hostile to that which is not. And it wasn't that I wasn't in a humane system. The system we had in our, even in our primary schools, like our primary schools taught 8 years old, I'm learning why I shouldn't call another person by a derogatory name. And we have 5 different races that we consider ourselves to be one people in Guyana. So the derogatory names were given, and we weren't. So I grew up. So when I see, especially when I came to North America, 29 years old, I mean, I've seen all the movies. I'm really, really versatile in literature, and I uh, even when I talk about literature itself, the hostility towards me as a Black person, it's something I had to learn to. I felt sad. A person could judge me as a book and not even know me, and so that was one of my biggest things coming to Canada, to force away that sadness that I continue to feel every time I got the judgment. I was like, and they, I had to learn that people live in fear. I had to learn that to get that person to make a step forward out of that fear, I had to hold their hands and gently give them enough information, and still hold their hands. I could give them as much information as possible, but they're not coming out of there. So if I can't guide them around and take them places, it's not happening. But like I said, the open-mindedness that I meet people all over the world, from all over the world, who have never met Black people, who have um, lived in very, very exclusive societies. But we say there's about 3% free people in the world who don't have any fear of anyone, accepts everyone. It's up to about 14% because their mental health conditions, when you're talking about, everyone is anxious and protective of themselves and their anxiety. And the anxiety around that makes it hard for them to break out of the trait. I mean, China just searched on anxiety. Sorry, I know I'm taking a long time, and I'm saying, but I really don't think that we have to go out of our way to expose children to things. All we have to do is get them to practice mindfulness, basically. You know, be mindful to your sister, be mindful to your mom, be mindful. And the reasons why, because they are more educated. The most interesting thing that I sent a friend today, it was another friend sent him to me a thing about citizenship. And I think I will share it with Mark later, is the idea that we don't know the reason why we have to be assertive and hold our position. And as a citizen, we have to give true value all the time so that the society that protects us could give us some of that true value itself. Even if it's not returned, you just have to. It's not a case of where you say if I don't give that and the society deteriorates, I can't say anything because I did not try to improve the society, try to maintain that what I think is good. So again, I'm running away. Basically,
Thank you, though. Those are important points, and I appreciate your sharing your perspective. It is such a difference coming from somewhere like Guyana and experiencing what you've experienced. So thank you for sharing that.
But I think we all do. We all do to somewhat, because when especially when we read it, Homer, I love quite a few things that you said, in the sense of it has to be structural, but how do you structure? How do you structure something that eventually could become too rigid? We always take things too far or change it to the way that we like it. And so one person will come from an area and say, well, this is the way I'm taught it. But so the thing is, practicing as a unit, I really do believe, like the Chinese, that the family is the building block of any community.
And that's actually very
The
consistent, I
idea
think,
that,
with, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Paul,
what
sorry.
Homer is saying. What, what I'm saying is that we don't have to do it by going somewhere else. Right in our family, even if it's two in the family, um, one of you will do something to annoy each other. You want to know the reason why. So are you going to express in a tone that the person will clinch up and not give you a true value or answer to what they're saying, why they have that impetus or whatever to cause the conflict?
Right.
When you're able to express it, you get a true value and you learn these practices. These are the same practices that are met from people who've never met Black people before and still don't have any sort of animosity or weirdness. You're just another person. It's like being treated by a brother or a sister,
Yeah.
you know?
Thanks,
Actually,
Paul.
ask Chessmack
Yeah.
about our relationship. So,
Yeah.
so
It
yes,
goes with,
thank you
there's
very
a
much for listening
question,
to me.
there's a question from Sunita in the chat, and she says, being a multicultural parent, how can we talk about this? Even with our multicultural children, these concepts are important for identity, and many times being neither here nor there culture-wise can be rather difficult. So how can we make this better for our children? You know, I think it's really a matter of perspective. So in some ways you can think I'm neither here nor there, and it's this idea of like they're third culture kids, and you know, that's one perspective. Another perspective is that they're richer to have both. And so I think in a lot of ways, maybe a Baha'i perspective is that they are richer because they have both. Can you celebrate? Is there room to celebrate both? And hopefully there is.
Well, there's it's interesting we talk about that because you know, those of us who were born in one country kind of grew up a little bit and then moved around, have this issue that we deal with, which is I'm you know, within the Iranian community, I'm not really considered fully Iranian. In the Western community, I'm not, you know, fully considered to be Western or Canadian or British wherever I live. And so there is this third category. There's also another category, which is those people that really have lived and functioned both personally and career-wise, have been truly global. And there's actually a number of organizations where those individuals are members and they get together and they share the challenges that they have in terms of identity and in terms of fitting in. And what's really interesting is a lot of studies have been done about the future of leadership and how we're transitioning from this a leadership that's based on very narrow and very deep knowledge and understanding to a leadership that's more global and more inclusive, meaning that the future leaders, you talked about the future, you know, the jobs that we need to prepare for that have not, we don't know about yet, which is how do we connect the dots, being able to see the whole as well as the component parts. And this is something that actually, we have a question from Sue that was earlier, who says, you know, when you talked about, you know, the current education being focused on math and sciences and the humanities and so on and so forth, you also talked about, you know, the jobs of the future that have not been created yet, technologies that have not been created yet, etc. And she's asking if you can kind of flesh that out a little bit. What does that really mean? What could that look like, if I understand her question correctly?
So this is like, I have workshops that are like a whole week on this question. So that's a great question. But essentially it's about mindset. So our current systems are so focused on succeeding at tests, which are limited in time, hard. You learn, and often you're learning the material and then you're forgetting it. And it's sort of, it goes with sort of like a one culture, one test, you know, that sort of a mindset. And what, you know, what employers are looking for. I mean, employers, many of like Google, Apple, they're looking to hire they don't even care as much where your college degree is from. They'd rather train you themselves. They're looking for people who have qualities like curiosity, adaptability, adventure, creativity, and there are ways to measure those. And certainly this idea of a global mindset, there's a whole science behind what is a global mindset. At the heart of it is empathy. At the heart of it is adaptability to different cultures. And so cultivating that sort of mindset, that awareness, those are more the skills than, say, calculus, coding, memorizing, the capital. I think actually memorizing national capitals is really helpful. But memorizing, a lot of, things that now, you can Google it. It'll do a much better job than what your memory served. It's good to be able to have access to information, and that's part of knowing the problems you want to solve. Because if for example, you're 12 years old and you're passionate about the ocean, you are going to learn all about maybe the physics, the ecology. You're going to learn how to write a persuasive essay to convince someone to not pollute the ocean. You're going to learn those skills based on the problem you want to solve. And so that's sort of what this new mindsets and skill sets sort of going together kind of looks like. And frankly, I think it's very Baha'i. It's very holistic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to call on Shaheen. Shaheen, do you have a question? Do you want to unmute yourself, please?
Yes, I've unmuted myself. Hello, Homa. Thanks for that
Hi,
presentation.
Shaheen.
Great to see you. You look great as ever.
Me too. Nice background.
Thank you. It's Como. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we know you're in Oakville.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, I wanted to just, one comment, a quick question. And I would love to hear Homa's opinion on this, and it's the following. I just heard this analogy, and I think it's wonderful. With everything that's going on, you got a pandemic, a racial awakening. Today I heard there's a new term called tornado. It's a firestorm with a tornado in California. Unbelievable. Only in 2020. Tornado. Wow. So, and they're coming, right? And I heard this analogy and I thought it was wonderful, especially because we're talking about kids. How many of us that have children have said, just go to your room, think about what you've done, calm down and come back and we'll talk about it. And it feels like God has sent us all to our room.
I always say we're in a collective timeout. This is God's timeout.
This is our timeout.
Yes, I always say that.
And it's physical because of the pandemic. We're really in our room and we have to really think about what we've done, right? Mm-hmm. And since we're there, and I guess that's the comment, and the question is, I think everything you talked about, Homa, is gonna it's gonna go so fast, the hockey stick is coming, that there is no choice about global citizenship anymore. Are you kidding me? Who would have ever thought? Yeah. By the way, this virus is not living organism. It's a protein. My wife's an infectious disease doctor. She taught me all this, by the way. And she said, how can this stupid little thing just, totally stop humanity?
Paralyzed.
Yeah, paralyzed.
Paralyzed the world.
Right? So I guess the question is, if this whole concept is gonna grow exponentially, it's not an issue of if. It's not even an issue of when. It's an issue of how quickly can we be prepared, and as individuals, not only as parents but as adults, to make sure the world realizes this is beyond what we've ever imagined, and world citizenship, and that we are one world is the only hope. And if there is another hope, by all means, I'll be the first in line to not only listen, but roll up my sleeves and join you to make it better.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, and that's how we should be. We should be very bold in trying to find solutions with people today.
I mean, it's so clear, you know, like when Baha'u'llah says the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. So, like, we can't, you know, if nations are going to go on their own to come up with a vaccine, if, you know, these are mindsets of I'm going to go it alone. It's frankly, it's like it's the colonial, patriarchal, you know, all these nationalistic, racist, all these systems are alive and well in our inability to solve the problem. And until, you know, there's a statistic that amazes me. Indigenous people make up less than 5% of the world's population. They protect 80% of global biodiversity. So our survival literally depends on Indigenous people to protect biodiversity. All this storm, all this sickness, all these, we are getting insects and things that should never be in my backyard in Pennsylvania that are eating the crops and the trees, and, you know, all this crazy tornado, all these things that are happening. This is us not cooperating, right? So I do think it is urgent to, you know, maybe I portray it as, oh, you know, so nice, look at this pretty picture, because we're like killing ourselves to get people to pay attention. We're killing ourselves to create these academic mental models to teach kids how to be better at cooperating to solve problems. And we're 20 years into the 21st century. More than 20 years ago, this whole range of 21st century skills came out, and they were cooperation, collaboration, creativity, and deeper cognitive thinking. I would add many more C words like compassion, cooperation. There's lots of things you can add. But it's been 20 years since the 21st century started, and a lot of people have been sort of sounding these alarms. Yeah, I think it's very urgent.
Thank you, Homa. Thank you.
I see Cheshmak's hand up. I don't know if you see her, Vafa.
Yeah, Cheshmak, if your hand is up. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes on Zoom, there's some things you see and some things you don't. It's not consistent, but Cheshmak, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation, all the good questions and comments. I had a question to ask you stemming from the wonderful 4-hour workshop of yours on anti-racism and unconscious bias that I had the pleasure of sitting in on. And as a parent who today going back to school online or in the school. So we're leaning towards online learning. And after hearing you and after really with my husband viewing this as an opportunity rather than, you know, I loved your thing of looking at things from a place of opportunity, not deficit.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how those of us parents who are heading into this time with the pandemic context of learning, whether it's at home or in the school, what we can do really to try and crystallize some of these concepts and ideas into the curriculum that's happening with our children, for example. And I'm particularly interested in picking your brains on the anti-racism stuff on the forefront for all of us right now. And there's such a momentum and there's so much discussion, and our children need to know these things and we need to know about these things. So how do we educate ourselves so that we can better educate our children and empower them and our family as a whole to be those, you know, agents of transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I love that you're thinking about this as an opportunity to be an agent of transformation for your kids. Like, if more parents would think that. And I actually think there is a movement of parents who are really seeing this moment is a movement. And seeing yourself as part of a movement and not just, you know, an isolated event. So I think one, again, I think this is an opportunity. Your kids are going to be home. It's going to be really hard, but it's a chance to have more conversations. And in the United States, and I think this is similar in Canada, I'm going to be working with there's an English speaking Montreal school district that I'm going to be doing some work with through the Big Questions Institute on some innovation. Maybe that's a plug to get more Canadian school districts. But like in the United States, more than 80% of teachers are white, and they're uncomfortable having any conversation about race. They are very uncomfortable, so they don't want to have anything. And so the message they're sending their kids, like that slide I showed, is that this is a taboo topic. We don't talk about it. So your chance now with your kids being home is you can have, books, conversations, you can share stories. Like there's so much actually also Baha'i history, Baha'i stories of incredible early African-American Baha'is, or North American or global African, people of color who have really contributed incredible through literature, the arts, the sciences, like every field. I think looking at, there are some really good organizations like Embrace Race. Look up Embrace Race. Another one is tolerance.org. I don't like the word tolerance because I don't like the idea of being tolerated, but teaching tolerance is actually a wonderful organization with they have lesson plans, they have a lot of ways to educate yourself on privilege, white privilege, bias, anti-racism, curriculum. There's so much good, like you just go down a rabbit hole. There is so much to explore, but even just starting with those, Embrace Race, Teaching Tolerance. There's another one, Facing History and Facing Ourselves is a wonderful organization with a lot around just centered in racial justice. So there are incredible efforts out there. And I think like once you go into a few of these, then it's going to open up a lot. Yeah. But good luck. I think you need to also be kind to yourself, because that's going to be a lot yeah.
Thank you. I found some good sources on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
Lots of really interesting people to follow who raise really good.
Oh, so Twitter is Twitter is where I am more active, and I'm Homa Tav on Twitter if anyone wants to find me. But Twitter gets a really bad name because, there's terrible stuff that is shared on Twitter. But one community that is really strong are educators. And so there are all kinds of, and especially you can go by grade, what grade your child is. Like there's, if they're in second grade, there's a second chat. If they're kindergartners, there's a kinder chat. There's social studies chat. There's world language chat. And then there's a lot of anti-racist, abolitionist teaching. There's an abolitionist teaching network. There is disrupt texts, which is all around getting rid of the, sort of the old reading list of, basically dead white men as the authors, and interrogating that and replacing it with a range of voices. So there are incredible discussions on Twitter. Yeah,
it's very often there's good to be found if we look for it, and if we network to find those things. And one of the good things that we found is you, Homo. So thank you so much for being a part of our fireside and offering your thoughts, your insights. Particularly, I think for me, the big takeaway is, kind of those 3 steps: taking a stand, paying attention, and doing something. And it's so consistent with how I was brought up. And this is what I learned from my father, who, in a different way, but very much consistent with these 3 principles. And he always kind of talked about the courage that's needed to do this, to, at different levels of courage for different levels of taking a stand, and different levels of courage for different levels of paying attention, etc. So I want to thank you very much for this, friends. We're coming up on 9:30. Thank you for the questions. I do want to say, at the end of all of our firesides, we say, if you're interested to participate and be on the distribution list, by all means, put your email in the text box, or you can stay connected with the person that extended the invitation to you, and they're likely on our distribution list and they will know it. Also want to let you know that we have, based on popular demand, started a YouTube channel where those videos that are being recorded, those sessions that are being recorded, are going to be posted. It might take a little time because obviously everybody is volunteering for all of this, and we like to clean up the videos because they are for open consumption. They're in the public domain. So we like to clean them up a little bit and make sure that the speakers and the presenters are comfortable with what is going to be posted. So stay tuned for that. We'll be sending out the link. We've already got 2 videos up. The 3rd video that goes up, we'll be sending the link out to the distribution lists, and you can subscribe and therefore get notified whenever there's an update. We'll be sending out a notice about the next fireside in the next couple of days. I want to thank everybody for taking the time this evening on Sunday to participate. And especially, again, thank you, Homo, for taking the time and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Nice
everybody.
to see you all.
Thank you.
All right.